Good evening, everyone. I welcome you to another session of the Malgudi Group. And today we are happy to welcome Dr. Navanita Sengupta, an assistant professor of English at Sarsuna College, Kolkata. We are happy to have you, ma'am. And we are waiting to listen to your thoughts on the select nonsense of Sukumar Ray. That is the book we are going to talk about today. And we also have Bhavya, who chooses to be quiet, who chooses to be the listener today. And I feel she has got a very nice role because talking about nonsense verse is very difficult, but listening to deliberations about nonsense verse is very interesting. So Bhavya will enjoy herself, I hope. And let me just begin with my thoughts about reading this book, The Select Nonsense of Sukumar Ray, which has been translated by Sukanta Chaudhary. The first poem in this book is Hodgepodge. It is titled Hodgepodge. And I feel the title captures the world that we are entering. It's a world of hodgepodge. And we know that this word involves things that are whimsical, involves situations that are humorous, and they follow a form that enjoys rhyme and rhythm. We have made up words, but made up words, they do not exist for their sake, just for the sake of existing, but those made up words sound purposeful, and that is interesting. While before reading Sukumar Ray's poetry, I read Edward Lear and Lewis Carroll, and in the last session, I was talking about Jumblies and Jabberwocky. And while I was just reading the titles, somehow the letter J struck me, and I noticed that the two poems, Jumblies and Jabberwocky, they begin with J. And then my thoughts turned towards a spirit of nonsense verse, and I thought that nonsense poetry, they jinx, yet judge your reasoning. And I came up with two more words with J, and I thought they brought out the spirit of nonsense poetry. They will jinx your reasoning, but then they are there to judge your reasoning. Because beneath this facade of nonsense, there are things so deep that you have to dive into the words to to grasp them, to grasp those depths of meaning here. So when I come to the first poem, Hodgepodge, I feel that okay, it is about creatures coming together and forming new creatures, existing creatures coming together to form new creatures. That is what the poem is about. But I could not help looking at the verbs in those lines, and they led me to another area of thought. For that, let me just read out the poem. Let me read out the poem for you, because if we don't read out a nonsense poem, then we cannot start talking about it. So let me just read out the poem Hodgepodge for you. A pochard and a porcupine, defying the grammarians, combined to form a porcochard, unmindful of their variance. A stork upon a tortoise grew, exclaiming, "What a hoot! A very handsome storkoise now we jointly constitute. A parakeet, its features lent unto the lowly lizard, in puzzle whether flies or fruit would better suit its gizzard. The very goat began to feel impatient of its state. It leapt upon a scorpion's back and grew incorporate. The tall giraffe refused to roam its ancestral savanna, but tried to don a locust's wings and glide in graceful manner. The cow was led to view itself and staggered from the shock. Its noble form had been usurped by some designing cock. And rent by schizophrenia, the elephant we view, the open seas, the forest trees are tearing it in two. The lion longed for antlers and was doomed to dwell in care until a stag supplied it with a truly splendid pair. So this is the poem where we have the porcochard, the storkois, and then the parakeet combining with the lizard. But I was talking about the verbs here. If we look at the first combination, it is an act of defying the grammarians. So the word defy is important for me because I think the first portmanteau word, a blend of two words, the first portmanteau must have been a kind of defying the rules about words being separate from each other and having distinct meanings. I think the first blend must have been an act of revolt that why can't we create a new word from two existing words to have a separate meaning? So if we understand it that way, then I believe that this first combination is a symbol of portmanteau words. Basically, that is how I look at it. And if we look at the second combination between a stork and a tortoise, if we notice the expression, what a hoot, we would understand that this combination was done just for sport, for the fun of it. And then the third combination between the parakeet and the lizard, it was done because the parakeet wanted to lend its features to the lowly lizard. So it is an act of lending something to someone in order to liberate or to elevate, which can have, links with how a society functions. It can have links with that. Then the fourth combination, where the goat leaps upon a scorpion's back because it is impatient of its state, it could be a symbol of, a human being trying to grapple with the existential crisis. I feel, that somehow comes into the picture when we read about the goat being impatient of its state and taking up another form to deal with this crisis. Then when the giraffe tries to don a locust's wings, it hints at the fact that many a time we are not satisfied with the lands that we inherit, with our ancestral lands, and we have bigger dreams for which we want to go away from the lands of our ancestors. And about the cow, whose form was usurped by the designing cock, there is an element of violence here. And I would say that this brought into mind the idea of identity theft. And yes, Dr. Anuradha Mishra says the word lowly must be focused upon. Yes, that is what I was saying, Anuradha ma'am, that it had to lend its features unto the lowly lizard to elevate. And because, that word lowly, who decided that the lizard was lowly and the parakeet wanted to lend the features to the lizard? Of course, the parakeet has decided that the lizard is lowly. So there is that whole debate in there. Of course, thank you for bringing it in. Yes, I was talking about the cow. The cow is shocked because its identity has been seized by the cock. So there is that idea of identity theft. And identity thefts are so common these days. People hacking our Facebook accounts, people, taking away um, uh, our account details, and our names being used for other purposes on social media. So all these things are happening today. And somehow this figure of the cow and the cock combined took me to that idea. And rent by schizophrenia, the elephant we view. So it is also about identity. But because it is about an illness which you are grappling with, a disease. Sometimes we don't call it an illness, we don't accept that it is an illness, and that, is something which is very important to realize that kind of a schism within ourselves, that kind of a split within ourselves as problematic. Even realizing that is a big problem, and then we can feel what the elephant must be going through. The open seas, the forest trees tearing it into. And then we come to the lion who longed for the antlers. So there is this longing forever for something which we don't have. And that longing could have disastrous results. We don't know whether the results are supposed to be aesthetic or supposed to be disastrous. That is a matter of debate. But I think that this poem is about, things, ideas, cultural artifacts coming together, mixing. And then we have what we call a cambalachi. Actually, hodgepodge, another term for hodgepodge is cambalachi. I came across this term. It is a Latin American term, which means a second-hand shop or a junk shop. So, if we consider that these combinations are unreal and they can at best be fantastical, and they belong in the world of, something that we equate with junk. No, this is unreal. This is not useful, and this is junk. Scraps which come together and they form junk. But then there have been very deep cultural analysis of, junk, because history resides in junk, of society, of politics, of uh, individual, what do we call, individual explorations in junk. Often in studies, in papers which have been published on junk, whether it is about junk food or items of junk, they have traced it to culture, to society, to individuals. So I think this word is important. In Spanish or in the Latin American language is cambalachi, which means a junk shop. Then it takes us to another aspect of how we view nonsense verse. So this is something where I would like to take a pause, and I would ask other members to come in here. See, we find it very difficult to talk about nonsense verse. Other texts we can analyze, we can, speak about at length, but it is very difficult to talk about nonsense verse. And we will also explore the reasons why it is difficult to talk about nonsense verse. If talking about it is difficult, I wonder how difficult must have, how difficult it must have been for the translator to translate these poems from Bengali to English. And I don't know. I don't know the language Bengali, so I don't know about the original text Abol Tabol. But we have Novanita ma'am, and she is from Kolkata, and I now ask her to step in and help us to understand how difficult it must have been for the translator or translators, because, as she will tell you, there have been many translations of Sukumar Ray's nonsense verse. So how difficult it would be for the translators to bring the words of Sukumar Ray into the English language. Yes.
Thank you so much. And that was a fascinating introduction to the world of nonsense. And I was more fascinated because this is one of the few times, very rare times, when I'm hearing a person without access to Bengali, to Sukumar's word, talking about his work. Because for us, we've grown up with him, with his verses. Even now, when there are these cultural programs in Kolkata, in the neighborhood, we have this pada, which is actually neighborhood. So you'll see there would be children reciting from Abol Tabol, reciting from his nonsense verse. So it's something that we have actually, grown up with. And then with an academic interest, when I returned to it, it was a very different kind of an experience. And I was listening very closely to your analysis of hodgepodge, which is what you took up. I just actually, you said the right thing, that how difficult it must have been to translate. And I guess it's this translation, this challenge of translating nonsense verse, which is more difficult than translating any other genre of poetry. That has, I think, somehow drawn many translators into this game. We have two very significant translators, in fact, three very significant translators. One is Satyajit Ray. We know him as the filmmaker. I'm sure all of you know him as the filmmaker. There are now translations of his detective series as well, so that's also available. He's one of the finest writers of children's literature in Bengal and has been largely translated. But what many of us here don't know, and most people outside Bengal don't know, is his tinkering with nonsense. And he is the first one who attempted to translate Sukumar Ray's Abol Tabol. And doing this year is very interesting and significant, because 1923 October, the first edition of Abol Tabol was published. So we are actually in the centenary year. Then 2023 October to 2024 October would be the centenary year of the publication of Abol Tabol, which is also the year in which Sukumar Ray passed away. He actually died just after composition of this, and then couldn't see it in full print before his death. Now, what I want to while you were talking about hodgepodge, you also mentioned you and Dr. Anuradha, you focused on this word lowly. Now, I would like to begin my point of discussion from here, because in the original, lowly doesn't exist. This word is not there. Okay, what the original says is, if I can translate just word by word, it's like he says that the lizard with the face like a parrot, the lizard with a face like a parrot has a lot of tension, that would it have to eat insect instead of green chilies. Okay, that's how the thing comes up in my translation. I've completely done away with the fun part and made it so very prosaic that, I mean, but then that's how it is. And when Satyajit Ray translates it, he says, the lizard with the parrot's head thought taking to the chili after years of eating worms is absolutely silly. So here I find Ray is closer to the original than Shukanta Chaudhary, Professor Chaudhary, where he says that parakeet its features lent unto the lowly lizard in puzzle where flies or fruit would better suit its gizzard. Now, in puzzle where flies or fruit would better suit its gizzard is perfectly fine, but the word lowly has been put inside, inserted just to keep the rhythm. But unfortunately, the nuances are things that one can only find if one knows the original. But that's not the purpose of translation. The purpose of translation is to take it to people who do not have an access to language. I mean, we have understood Garcia Marquez from English translations. In fact, I remember the first time reading Marquez, I didn't even know that he was a Spanish author. That like I thought that, okay, this is an English book and I'm reading an English book. When we were in school, and like we were not even bothered with the idea of translation. So, you know, this is what interests me very much when I talk of the translations of nonsense verses. And I was just thinking of reading one poem to you, both of Chaudhary's translation and Satyajit's translation. I think the best thing that I could have done was to make the poems visible on slide, but unfortunately I just couldn't do that. But what I can do is I can just read it slowly, read both the versions slowly. But before reading the version slowly, I just want to talk about the poem. The poem is The Customs of Bombagarh. Now, Bombagarh is an imaginary land, a land that has been cooked up in Sukumar Ray's mind. And the original poem says it is Bombagarhir Raja. Okay. Now, what is interesting here is if you look at the poem, let me just read the poem first, then probably it will be better. So, have you heard of the monarch of Bombagarh's orders to fry mango jelly and frame it with borders? And why does his queen wear a poof on her head? Or the queen's eldest brother knock nails into bread? Their people turn cartwheels to cure their cataract. Rub rouge in their eye by the light of the stars. Musicians walk muffled in the blankets of state, and bald-headed scholars stick stamps on their pate. But why should they pickle their watches in whey, or line the king's mattress with sandpaper grey? The king sits and howls like a fox in the court. On his lamp, the chief justice thumps pictures for sports. They hang broken jars from the throne and the walls, and the king's aunt plays cricket with pumpkins for balls. Her brother goes waltzing with hookahs adorned. But what does it mean? Could we please be informed? Now, this is a very, very, very faithful translation of the original. But this comes later. 1969, Satyajit had translated 10 poems of Sukumar Ray, which was the first time this was translated. And I'll just read what he does with the translation. And he names it as the king of Bombardia. So he says, he changes Bombagor to Bombardia. In the same context, I would want to mention, you mentioned Jumblies. So Satyajit does a translation of Jumblies. It's a very loose translation. And he changes Jumblies to Papangul. Okay. The word Jumbly changes to Papangul, and he writes of their journey in the sea and how they go. And there's a close, that's from English to Bangla, and here it is from Bangla to English. But the politics of translation for Satyajit remains the same. What he does is he changes the cultural nuances to that of the target audience. We now talk of cultural turn, where we are bringing the target audience to the source language. Satyajit Ray does just the opposite, and it's a fascinating thing if you can read, like if anyone reads his translations, how he plays with the cultural constructs. So he does the same thing with King of Bombardia. What he says is, in the land of Bombardia, customs are peculiar. The king, for instance, advocates gilded frame for chocolates, while the queen, who goes to bed with pillows strapped round her head, insists her brothers specialize in sticking nails in custard pies. Now, chocolates, gilded frames for chocolates. What Chaudhary has written here is to fry mango jelly and frame it with borders, which is what actually Sukumar has been talking about. Sukumar Ray says to like there's a term called amshotto, which is in Hindi is something like amavat. I don't know whether you understand amavat or not. It's like you.
I think it's Ambo Soda in
Ambo soda. We
Odia.
call it ambo soda in
Ambo Soda
Odia.
in Odia.
I can understand what you're talking
So,
about.
so
Yeah.
that's what he is talking about. So Kumar Ray talks about that, and he says that he frames it in the picture frame. So when Professor Chaudhary translates this to fry mango jelly, this is still closer. I mean, you can't translate a food which is so very local. So mango jelly still comes closer. So mango jelly, and then frames it with borders. So it's like basically the same. But what Satyajit does is he gilded frames for chocolates. So mango jelly to chocolate. I mean, okay, fine. Kids would love mango jellies. Kids would love chocolates. You have a contact point there. But then that's a very gross moving away from the original. Then there is another part which both of them does not include. Is there's this term called Ashtprahar, like 8. Ashprahar, you understand, right? So the queen, Satyajit says that queen goes to bed with pillow strapped around her head. While Shukanta Chaudhary translates it as the queen wear a poof on her head. So she's actually wearing the poof on her head or the pillow on her head throughout. So then again, see, Satyajit Ray brings in a kind of goes to bed is not required. It was not there. Then custard pies. The original says to nail bread with custard pie. And actually, when Sukumar Ray was writing, this bread, which in Bengali is called pauruti, was also something which is which was what do I say, exotic. It was not something like as such. Wheat was not very common to Bengal. Okay, refined wheat was even not common. It was only after famine that the wheat was included in the food habits of Bengal, because famine had destroyed the rice fields and there was a scarcity of rice. So, and then the spau roti or bread, which is again a machine-made, or I mean, sort of you have to bake it. It's a different. It was something not very common to everyday food. Okay, so sticking nail on bread would mean like you're wasting that food which is so expensive. And Satyajit Ray does a similar thing. He brings in custard pie, which again would be a delicacy in for the English readers. But then he does that. He changes it. So bread is not custard pie. Bread would be something very common to a person reading in English. So he makes it exotic. He communicates the idea. Okay. On moonlight nights, the Bombardians, I told you that Bomba god is made into Bombardians, all eyes painted in vermilion. Now, vermilion again is a very cultural thing here. In fact, Sukumar Ray is talking about vermilion also means sindoor. But what Sukumar Ray is talking about is alta. Alta is a very Bengali thing, which all married, it's a mark of marriage, which women used to wear around their feet. They would border their feet with that red liquid kind of thing, which we call alta. So again, there is another kind of a thing. Now, keep his silver pocket watch immersed in boiling butterscotch. While it's actually ghee. Okay, what Sukumar Ray uses is ghee, which Professor Chaudhary is closer when he says whey. Watches in whey. That's what Chaudhary says. That why should they pickle their watches in whey? And while he writes that keeps his silver watch immersed in boiling butterscotch. Now, so these are some of the things that we find. And then towards the end, where there's this is King's aunt plays cricket with pumpkin balls. His brother goes waltzing with hookahs adorned. Now, King's aunt and Sukumar Ray talks about Pishi and Kaka. Pishi means father's sister and Kaka is father's brother. Now, in English, everything becomes uncle and aunt. We have this bua and chacha thing, but in English, we just have the uncle and aunt. So one of the things is that, but then there's not much that one can do with it. And also, it's not very important as a point of concern as well. But this, the last two lines where, which Professor Chaudhary ends with, but what does it mean? Could we please be informed? So can we please know what it means? While Satyajit Ray, he ends it with, all of which, though mighty queer, is natural in Bombardier. Now, what does it mean? Could we please be informed? That's what actually Sukumar Ray ends it with as well. That can anyone tell me how or why these things are happening? That's what a word by word translation of Sukumar Ray's words would be. But Satyajit just does a kind of brings in his perspective and says that all of which, though mighty queer, is natural in Bombardier. So, what I'm trying to focus on is how there is what Satyajit Ray is trying to do is trying to bring the text very close to the target audience. That is also a kind of translation, because I think when we are talking of translated text, it is also important to know why a person is translating. And when Professor Chaudhary is translating, it's a later translation. That is the time when the cultural turn in translation has already happened. And we have Suzanne Basnet and Harish Trivedi talking about the cultural turn. We have Lawrence Venuti talking about domestication and foreignization. While when we have Satyajit Ray translating, he is actually translating for the West. Why? There is an agenda to show. It's in 1969, much before this, the cultural turn would come around almost 30 years later. So what his agenda is to show the world that nonsense literature is something that is well developed in Bengal as well. And I deliberately thought of bringing in Satyajit Ray's translation. The book is available in the, it's been published by this writer's workshop, Professor Apilal's publishing house, which is now run by Professor Anandolal. So it's been published by writer's workshop. So it's available, still in circulation. Interestingly, Calcutta University has included this in the syllabus of translated literature, while a much better translation is, much faithful translation is Professor Chaudhary's translation, or Professor, this one, Sampurna Banerjee's translation. So, Sampurna Chatterjee, so sorry, Sampurna Chatterjee's translation. So, so what I'm trying to say is, I just thought that bringing in Satyajit Ray's perspective would be interesting for you to know, because he translates from a very different perspective. He does the same thing with this. I'll also talk a bit about this hodgepodge. You said this. I forgot the term that you use. Could you just remind me?
Cambalachi.
Cambalachi, right? That means something to do with junks, right?
Junk, yes.
Yeah. So the original translation, original title is Khichuri. Khichuri is khichdi, the food. So it's like jumbled up. And Shukanta Chaudhary translates it as hodgepodge, which is again a loose translation of khichdi. And Satyajit Ray translates it as stew much. Okay, so it's all kind of to do with food, and food becomes a very significant part of this thing. But though they are talking about the various kinds of breaking of the hierarchies, breaking of the rules, as you said, defiance, defying the, and grammarian. I'm so happy that this translation contains the word grammarian, because that's what Sukumar Ray begins with. He says that Bakkaron Manina, which means like I don't believe in grammars. And that's what Shukanta Chaudhary's translation is also bringing in. Well, that's really lacking in Satyajit's translation. So my entire point is, when we are reading with reading translations, I guess it's if multiple translations are available, it would be a good idea to look at the multiple translations, because they vary so much. For example, here he talks about lug-headed lagoon. That which is actually Billy Hawk calf in Sampurna Chatterjee's translation. So we have these various changes, various differences of perspectives, of opinions, depending on the positionality of translator. And we all try to, because translation is a negotiation. We are negotiating between two cultures, between two languages, particularly when we are talking about this one, translation of nonsense rhymes, where culture plays such an important role. There again, we find that we have this entire thing of not sort of not having a one perfect appropriate translation, but then many translations which would help us to understand the text. Maybe not, of course, I mean, it's not always possible to be very close to the original. It would be difficult to be very close to the original, because nonsense verse depends so much on sound, on rhythm, and on the cultural constructs, the very, very core cultural terms. So that's why it becomes so difficult. But then, yes, with Satyajit Ray, we find that a lot of translations, and particularly of Abol Tabol happening. There are, when I myself have come across, apart from this three, Professor Chaudhary's, Sampurna Chatterjee's, and there is another by Niladri Roy. So, and then while I was just browsing this afternoon, I came across another translation. I didn't quite like that, so I did not include, but then I've forgotten the name also. But then there was this another translation in PDF by another person. So there are around 6 to 7 translations of this. And But then I guess the standard ones would be to look at Professor Chaudhry's translation as well as Sampurna Chatterjee's translation, which has been brought out by Puffin Books. So that these are some of the areas that you can look upon. And another thing, if you compare the texts of Sampurna Chatterjee and Professor Chaudhry, you will find that they are saying the same thing, and at least similar things, but they're saying it in such a different way that the rhymes well. So that adds another layer of richness to this entire idea of reading nonsense. So one poem you have saying the same thing but in multiple voices. So that's another very interesting thing that you can interesting exercise, in fact, that I make my students do that to compare these two poems and tell us what's different and what do you think of it. My problem is most of my students know English, know Bangla, so they are familiar with the Bengali. But if you give to your students, probably they will have more fun because they don't have this original baggage. They are not carrying that original baggage in the back of their mind. So they'll be looking at the translations as fresh pieces. So that's something that I've been thinking about. And so I mean, maybe I stop here and wait for your comments. And
Thank you, Nobonita ma'am. That was so interesting, and we couldn't have, reflected on the aspect of translation because we don't have access to the original language. But
that's
you
also the
explained,
entire point of translation, isn't
yeah,
it?
true,
Get at
true.
things that we otherwise wouldn't read, couldn't.
Right. Had there not been translations, we could not have entered the world of Sukumar Ray. So, and we would not have enjoyed the poem so much. While reading the poems, we can't help, laughing. But that's why the translations are so important. And you rightly pointed out that translations differ from each other, and that also brings in the element of imagination, right? And nonsense verse, with simple words, you can imagine so much. That is the
Yeah.
freedom that nonsense verse gives you. So naturally, here translations would differ from each other a lot because the way I would read a poem, it might be completely different from how you
Yes.
read it. And translators are also readers. I mean, they are readers first, and then naturally they would bring in how they perceive the poem. That would be reflected in their translation. So while I was reading, that poem uh, titled, it's about a wedding, and
Uh-huh.
in
Yes. Yes.
Shukanta Chaudhry's translation, it is titled "A Marriage is Announced." So
Hmm.
while reading it, it begins this way. I went to Posta and they said your daughter was about to wed and Gangaram is the lucky man. So let me tell you what I can. Then the whole thing about how unsuitable a groom Gangaram actually is, but then he's suitable because just because of his noble breed and just because of the fact that he's connected to Grand Panjandram,
Yeah.
Grand Panjandram's direct seed. So initially I could not. I had a little difficulty in understanding that this man goes to another place and then those people tell them about this person who is going to marry his daughter. But then I came across another translation by Ruchira Ghosh available on the on the internet, and there the title is The Suitable Groom, and it begins this way: Heard your daughter is getting married. From Posta, the news I carried. Gangaram, the groom you chose, I wish to describe the quality he owes. Now listen, listen, hark, hark, and then goes on. So this became clearer to me after reading this version.
Yeah.
So as you rightly said, we should compare translations. If we don't have access to the original language, it's fine. But then if we are reading a work through translation, we should also look up other translations and, compare them. That is a very important point that you raised.
And you know,
So,
I'll just intervene a
yeah,
bit.
please, please.
The original title is also the right groom. I mean, the right kind of groom. And this is a very cultural poem as well, because in Bengal, particularly in 19th century, girls would be wedded to, I mean, absolutely useless men. I mean, men about to die, men with multiple marriages, men with, I mean, you can think of the worst case scenario and you'll find, because the father would not have money to pay a dowry, firstly. Secondly, a girl not married above the age of 12 or 16, depending on which time period I'm talking about, they would be ostracized by the society. So among the kuleen, this poem also has this word kuleen, which means a higher class, higher caste Bengali. And so the girl will have to be married to someone who's absolutely worthless just to save oneself from the from ostracism. So this is a very humorous, but a very, again, a very satiric take on that whole thing. So, yeah. I'm so glad you
True.
mentioned this. So I just thought I must.
So actually, we can go on and on. I mean, all the poems are so fertile, I would say. I mean, they bring in so many ideas, and if you can just sit in one place after reading it, you finish reading a poem and then just leave it and sit and you think so many things come to your mind. That is the play of thoughts that happens after you read a nonsense poem. Then let us move to Dr. Anuradha Mishra and listen to her observations about, these nonsense verses. Yes, Anuradha ma'am, would you please come in?
Yeah. Hello. Hi, everyone. I haven't been able to read the text that you have sent because of so many things, but it has been very enlightening to listen to both of you. And I would like to also talk about, have been talking about translation. I think here we can say that translation has been an interpretation for the translator, because we see that they have interpreted in different ways the original text. And I am so, we are very lucky that Navanita madam is there to take us to the original text. Otherwise, we would have stayed in that word lowly and we'd have thought that it is in the original and all. But again, I would like to say that I think nonsense literature makes more sense because it is a kind of satire to whatever is happening in the society in a very light manner. I haven't read any of the poems, but whatever two, three poems you both have talked about, what I can conclude is that very subtly they are trying to throw light on those practices that are going on in the society, and they are not trying to change it or have any comment on it. Just showing us that this is what is happening through their literature. And I have always liked nonsense literature because I always thought that it is more difficult to write such things that does not make sense. That is why it is called nonsense, and to put sense inside that nonsense words. And I think these are more layered than the normal poems. You can find layers of meaning in it, and that is why there are more varied translations of these poems. We have read translations of normal poems also, sensible poems that we call. But when it comes to nonsense poems, I think these poems, because of their very richness, like you said, they are very fertile in nature. these things gave the interpreter, the translator, a lot of room to interpret and talk about uh, how they see the poem and how they want their audience to see the poem. I think that is all I'd like to say. And this had intrigued me a lot. Now I will go back to the text maybe and read it if I really can.
So
Too
we
many
are
things going
happy
on
that
actually.
you will now go and read the text. So that's wonderful,
Actually,
Anuradha.
I joined this session for this very reason, because apart from what I'm teaching in the classroom, I haven't been able to very much read outside it. So now also I am not in my workplace. I'm at home because of some work, and still I said that let's listen to whatever they are saying. Although I have nothing to participate, but listening is good, and I'm glad that I joined the meeting. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you, Anuradha ma'am.
Yeah.
And now, if Pragya ma'am can hear us, I would like her to say something. It's strange calling her Pragya ma'am because she is my classmate. Pragya, please speak up. Hello, Pragya, are you there? She actually texted me saying that she has some network issues. So I think that's the problem. Okay, fine. I think we could wrap up today's session. Definitely, we are coming back for another session on this text, the nonsense verse of Sukumar Ray, because we feel that we are not done with the poems. We have so many things to
We
say
actually,
about them.
we did
Yes.
not talk about the poems actually. We talked about
Ah,
this whole
yes,
process
yes.
of translation today.
Yes,
I
so
think there
that
is,
I wanted that aspect of translation to be brought in because of the important point that Navanita ma'am raised, that we must not confine ourselves to one translation only. We
yes.
should compare translations because just
Mm,
like you pointed out the significance of the word lowly, and then ma'am said that the word does not figure
that
in the
does not
original
exist
at all.
in the
So we
original. Yeah.
should, if we do not know the original
And
language, we should just read other translations of the same text as well.
And I think chronology matters a lot here. Like Madam pointed out that Satyajit Ray's translation, it came somewhere in 1969 when the whole motive was to show the West that we also have nonsense literature. It exists. We are rich. And the other one where the word lowly existed, I think that comes later, and that talks about the hierarchy in the society.
Hmm.
Who decides it? I think when the translation comes, what kind of mindset we have and what we want to tell through our translation. That is why I think the different versions of translations.
True, true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So should we wind up today? Uh,
Yeah.
it has been an interesting session, and I
1
got to
hour
learn
of
a lot
escape.
from Nabanita ma'am. Yes, yes, Anuradha ma'am.
Yeah, I, I said 1 hour of escape from the
Yeah,
Delhi
yeah, and
Monday night.
a very welcome escape, I would say, and that is
Yes,
why we have
yes,
formed
indeed.
this group so that we may,
Yeah,
come together and talk about things that we love. Because often, as you
yes.
said, our
And
job does not always allow us, that space to read
Yeah.
what we love. That is why we
yes.
need something like this.
And the one good thing about this group is that this group is not in a hurry.
Hmm.
This group is not impatient, and this group gives freedom. Like in the last session, you recorded it on your own.
Yeah, because no one was there.
No pushing anyone. Come and join. You all are part. You are not coming. I am doing everything. I mean, that's wonderful. I mean,
Thank you.
this
Thank
kind of
you.
freedom is needed. And then only somewhere we also feel that, okay, we should join because I have time. If I don't have time, I tell you. Otherwise, sometimes I fail to tell you. But it's
Mm.
wonderful.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
And we also, invite Navneeta ma'am to join us, to join that group, and
Yes, of course. You must.
be part of our regular sessions, because I met Navneeta ma'am in an FDP that we were doing together, and it was titled Translation Studies from the Global South. It was organized by Sri Sri University. And it was a wonderful FDP
Yes,
where,
very
such a
interesting.
rich FDP.
Very-
And I enjoyed listening to Navneeta ma'am's, observations throughout that FTP. So when she mentioned, that she often talks about translations of Sukumar Ray's nonsense verse in classes, and also I thought definitely I have to ask her to come and join us in this session and to enlighten us. But then I also invite her to join this group and
Sure.
keep connecting with us.
Yes, yes.
Yes,
I'd love
yes,
to.
yes.
Thank you for the
Okay.
invitation.
Thank you so much, Navanita ma'am and Anuradha ma'am.
Thanks
And
a
let
lot to
us
all of you.
yeah, let us wind
Thank
up
you.
today. Good
Oh,
Yeah.
night,
good
everyone.
night.
Good night. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.